In the winter of 1993, a state surveyor named Michael Brennan was marking property lines in the remote hills of eastern Kentucky when he found something that shouldn't have existed. A cluster of 7 houses, arranged in a near-perfect circle, surrounded by forest so thick the satellite imagery had missed it entirely. When he approached, he noticed the windows first. They were covered not with curtains, but with what looked like layers of newspaper, some yellowed and brittle, dating back decades. The doors were painted black, all of them, and in the center of the circle stood a stone well, filled not with water, but with hundreds of glass jars, each one containing a single photograph, face down. Brennan never filed his report. He resigned 2 weeks later and moved to Oregon. He wouldn't speak about what he saw until 26 years later, 3 months before his death, when he finally told his daughter one sentence: "They didn't look like us anymore." Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. What you're about to hear is not folklore. It's not an urban legend whispered around campfires. This is a documented case of biological isolation, so extreme, so deliberate, that it created something science still refuses to fully acknowledge. A family, one single bloodline that withdrew from the outside world in 1872 and didn't emerge for over a century. And when the outside world finally found them again, they had changed. Not culturally, not psychologically, physically, in ways that defied every known principle of human genetics. The medical reports were buried, the photographs were seized. The family members themselves were scattered across 3 states under false names, forbidden from ever contacting one another again. But the story didn't die. It couldn't, because some truths are carved too deep into the land itself to ever be erased. This is the story of the Farrow family, and this is what happens when a bloodline is left to evolve in absolute darkness. The Farrow family arrived in Harlan County, Kentucky in 1868. They were unremarkable at first. Silas Farrow, his wife Miriam, and their 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, all appearing healthy, normal, devout. Silas purchased 80 acres of dense woodland for almost nothing. The land was considered cursed by the locals. 3 previous families had tried to settle there. All 3 abandoned their claims within a year, reporting persistent illness, strange sounds in the night, and what they described as a wrongness in the soil. Silas didn't care, or perhaps that's exactly why he chose it. Because what the county records don't show, what was carefully omitted from every census and land deed, is that Silas Farrow was fleeing something. Not the law, not debt, something worse, his own community. In 1870, a letter was sent from a reverend in Pennsylvania to the Harlan County Courthouse. It was never officially filed, but a copy survived in the private papers of a local judge, discovered only in 2007. The letter was a warning. It stated that Silas Farrow had been expelled from his church for unnatural practices regarding the propagation of his line. The Reverend wrote that Silas believed his family carried the blood of a purer creation, and that intermarrying with outsiders was a form of spiritual contamination. He had attempted to arrange a marriage between his eldest son and his eldest daughter. When the community intervened, Silas vanished in the night, taking his entire family with him. For 2 years, the Farrows lived quietly in Kentucky. They were seen occasionally in town. They purchased supplies. They attended church, though they spoke to no one. And then, in the spring of 1872, Silas made his final visit to Harlan. He bought 6 months' worth of flour, salt, ammunition, and lamp oil. He also bought something else, something the store owner noted in his ledger because it struck him as odd. Silas purchased 47 locks, all keyed the same. When asked why, Silas smiled and said, "To keep the world out, and to keep us in." He was never seen in town again. None of them were, and for the next 121 years, the forest swallowed them whole. For nearly 3 decades, the Farrow property became a blank space on the map. Locals knew it was there, but it existed in that peculiar category of things people choose not to think about. A few hunters reported seeing smoke rising from the property. Others claimed they heard singing children's voices, always at dusk, always the same hymn, though no one could quite name which one. But no one went to investigate. There's a difference between curiosity and wisdom, and the people of Harlan County had learned where that line was drawn. The first official attempt to make contact came in 1901. A federal census taker named Raymond Stills was assigned to verify the Farrow household. He rode out to the property on horseback, following an overgrown trail that barely existed anymore. What he found unsettled him enough to file a formal complaint with his supervisor. The property was surrounded by a fence, not a normal fence, but a bizarre construction of woven branches, animal bones, and what appeared to be human hair, braided and stretched between posts. He described it as a boundary meant to be seen, not crossed. Beyond it, he could see the houses. 7 of them now, though only one had existed when Silas first arrived. They were arranged in a perfect circle, exactly as Michael Brennan would find them 92 years later. Stills called out. He rang a bell he'd brought for exactly this purpose. And then he heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. From behind the fence, a figure emerged. Stills described him as a young man, perhaps 20 years old, pale, thin, wearing clothing that looked homemade and decades out of fashion. But it was the eyes that Stills remembered most. He wrote that they were too large for his face and set too far apart, like something had gently pushed them toward the edges of his skull. The young man did not speak. He simply stared. And then, after nearly a full minute of silence, he smiled. Stills described the smile as containing too many teeth. The census taker left. He marked the Farrow household as uncooperative and recommended someone else handle it next time. He never returned to Harlan County. And, in his personal journal, found after his death in 1943, he had written a single line about that day. They are not sick. They are becoming. Over the next 40 years, the Farrow family achieved something most rural communities couldn't complete: invisibility. No births were registered, no deaths reported, no taxes paid. The land existed in a legal gray space, still technically owned by Silas Farrow, who by 1940 would have been well over 100 years old. But the county never foreclosed, never investigated. There's a notation in the Harlan County Administrative Records from 1938 that simply says, "Let that land lie." But absence of official record doesn't mean absence of contact. People saw things. A doctor named Elizabeth Cormier kept a private journal throughout her 40-year practice in Harlan County, and in it, she documented 3 separate encounters with individuals she believed were Farrows. The first came in 1923. A woman appeared at her office at dawn, barefoot, wearing a dress that looked like it had been sewn from burlap and rabbit pelts. She was pregnant, heavily pregnant. But when Dr. Cormier asked how far along she was, the woman said, 11 months. Dr. Cormier assumed she'd miscounted. She examined her, and then she stopped. In her journal she wrote, "The child is positioned incorrectly, not breech, not transverse, folded, as if it had too many joints." The woman left before Dr. Cormier could ask any more questions. She returned 3 weeks later with an infant wrapped in cloth. The baby was healthy, the woman said. Perfect. She only wanted to show the doctor she'd been wrong to worry. Dr. Cormier asked to see the child. The woman pulled back the cloth. The doctor's entry that night was a single sentence. "I told her it was beautiful. I lied." The second encounter came in 1931. A boy, no older than 12, with fingers so long they had to curl when he made a fist. The third, in 1946, a man missing his outer ears entirely, the holes covered with smooth skin, yet he responded to every sound Dr. Cormier made, even whispers. She noted, "He hears better than I do." Each time, Dr. Cormier asked where they lived. Each time, they pointed toward the woods and said the same thing, "With our family." And each time, after they left, she found something on her doorstep, a gift. A bundle of dried flowers tied with hair, a carved wooden bird with too many wings, a jar of honey that smelled faintly of copper. By the time the 1960s arrived, the Farrow family had become something else entirely, a ghost story, a cautionary tale, something parents mentioned to keep children from wandering too deep into the woods. But ghost stories don't leave footprints. They don't steal livestock. And they don't show up on film. In 1967, a wildlife photographer named Thomas Ridge was documenting elk migration patterns in the Daniel Boone National Forest. He set up motion-activated cameras across a 12-mile stretch of woodland, including 3 on the edge of what he didn't know was Farrow land. When he collected the cameras 6 weeks later, 2 of them were missing. The third had been destroyed, smashed methodically, the film exposed to light. But the camera had a backup roll. A feature Ridge had installed himself. When he developed it, he found 73 photographs taken over a single night. Most showed nothing. Trees, darkness, but 6 of them showed figures. They were human in shape, but their proportions were wrong. Too tall, too thin, limbs that seemed to bend at points where there were no joints. Ridge brought the photographs to the University of Kentucky. The biology department refused to analyze them. The anthropology department said they were obvious forgeries, but a graduate student named Alan Moss kept copies. He became obsessed. He spent 2 years researching the area, compiling reports, interviews, medical records. He wrote his thesis on isolated populations and genetic drift. He never mentioned the Farrows by name, but anyone who read it carefully knew exactly what he was describing. His thesis was rejected. He was told his conclusions were scientifically irresponsible and dangerous. Alan Moss disappeared in 1974 while hiking alone in Harlan County. His backpack was found 3 miles from Farrow land. Inside was a notebook. The last entry read, "I can hear them singing. I'm going to introduce myself. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline?" The walls of silence were beginning to crack, but what would finally break them open wasn't curiosity. It was a fire. On the night of August 14th, 1992, a lightning strike ignited a wildfire that tore through 1,800 acres of eastern Kentucky woodland. Fire crews from 3 counties responded, helicopters dropped water, fire breaks were cut. And for the first time in 120 years, outsiders crossed onto Farrow land in force. The fire chief, a man named Douglas Hem, was the first to see the houses. 7 structures, arranged in that impossible circle, untouched by flame despite being surrounded by burning forest. The fire had stopped at the bone fence, the same fence Raymond Stills had described 91 years earlier, now reinforced with metal, glass, and what looked like mirrors angled to reflect light away from the compound. Hem radioed for law enforcement. Something was wrong. The houses had no power lines, no phone connections, no vehicles, and every single window was still covered. Sheriff's deputies arrived at dawn. They called out. No response. They entered the property with a warrant issued on the grounds of emergency wellness checks. What they found inside the first house would require 3 of the 6 deputies to enter psychological counseling. The interior was immaculate. Furniture carved by hand. Walls covered in portraits, hundreds of them, painted in oil, showing faces that seemed to share features but distorted across generations, like watching evolution through a funhouse mirror. Eyes growing larger, jaws narrowing, fingers elongating in each successive portrait. But it was the children's room that broke them. 12 beds, all occupied. The children were alive, aged between 4 and 16, but none of them spoke. None of them reacted to the officer's presence. And their bodies, every single one, showed abnormalities the deputies couldn't articulate. One officer later said, "They looked like someone had drawn a human from memory, but got the details slightly wrong." In total, 47 individuals were removed from the property that day. 47 people spanning at least 5 living generations, all from a single bloodline that had been intermarrying for over a century. The youngest was 6 months old. The oldest claimed to be 93 but looked 60. Medical teams arrived, geneticists, psychologists, federal agents, and within 72 hours, a perimeter was established. The press was turned away, and every person involved was required to sign a non-disclosure agreement backed by federal law. The official story was simple. A reclusive religious community had been safely evacuated, but the medical reports told a different truth. The medical examinations were conducted at 3 separate facilities across Kentucky and Tennessee. The results were never published, never peer-reviewed, never formally acknowledged. But documents leaked in 2016 tell us everything we need to know. The Farrow family members displayed consistent physiological abnormalities that couldn't be explained by known genetic disorders. Bone density 40% higher than average. Extra vertebrae in 60% of subjects. Elongated finger bones with additional joints. Eye sockets that had widened over generations, allowing for larger ocular structures, and most disturbing, enhanced low-light vision far beyond normal human capability. One researcher noted, "Their eyes reflect light like an animal's. This trait appears in even the youngest children, but the physical changes were only part of it. Neurological scans showed brain structures that had developed differently. The hippocampus was enlarged, the amygdala reduced. They processed fear differently than we do. Several subjects showed no stress response to stimuli that would terrify a normal person." One psychologist wrote, "They aren't afraid of the dark. They're comfortable in it. Prefer it. As if they've adapted to it." The family members were separated, placed in different group homes, hospitals, rehabilitation centers. They were given new names, new identities. The youngest children were adopted out to families in 7 different states, all records sealed. The adults were released after psychiatric evaluation, given social security numbers, and told never to contact each other again. Most complied. 3 disappeared within a year. 2 were found living together in rural Montana in 2004. When authorities tried to separate them again, one said, "You can scatter us, but the blood remembers." The property was seized by the federal government under eminent domain. The houses were demolished in 1994. The land was designated as protected wilderness, closed to public access. No explanation given. But hikers still report things. Singing in the woods, bone structures hanging from trees. And in 2018, a ranger found something that was never officially reported but was shared privately among staff, a circle of stones, and in the center, a photograph buried face down in the soil, showing a family of 12, all of them smiling, none of them quite human anymore. Michael Brennan was right. They didn't look like us anymore, because they'd become something else, something we don't have a name for, something that happens when a bloodline is left alone long enough to forget it was ever supposed to be anything other than itself. The question we're left with isn't whether isolation can change us. We know it can. The question is, how many other families are still out there, hidden in the deep places, evolving in directions science hasn't discovered yet? And if we found them, would we even recognize them as human? Some doors, once closed, should never be opened. But the Farrow family didn't close a door. They became what was on the other side. If this story disturbed you the way it disturbed me, leave a comment below. Tell us what you think really happened to the 3 who disappeared. And if you know of any other stories like this, families that vanished, communities that went silent, share them, because the past isn't finished with us. It's just waiting in the woods, singing hymns we've forgotten, becoming something we were never meant to see.